Hello again. Here we are back again, looking at some more in the book of Daniel. I hope you were able to make sense out of the introduction that we gave last week. Uh, and I hope you'll excuse my glasses today. I got a lot of reading to do in the scriptures, and my eyes are just not working too well today. But praise God, I'm here, I'm up, I'm breathing, and I'm just feeling well. Like I've always said, from the head up, from the neck up, I feel like I'm about 40. If I could just get the body to cooperate. Okay, let's forget my quips and let's start working on the book of Daniel. The book of Daniel, as we said, we talked last time about how it was more of a book of prophecy than it is a book of a story about a man named Daniel, although it does encompass his life and talks a lot about him. But it is a very interesting thing. So let's look into it. And we'll start out with Daniel 1:1. In the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. Now that's an important verse there, because it helps us to date the book. Tells us a little bit more about Daniel's life and about his age. In 605 BC was the expedition that was of the first three major invasions of Palestine by Nebuchadnezzar and his father, if I can pronounce it right, Nabopolassar, who were kings of Babylon. Now the second invasion occurred in 597 BC when Jehoiakim and the son of Jehoiakim was compelled by the Chaldeans to surrender Jerusalem. And you can read about that in 2 Kings 24. And they went into captivity with all his princes and his leaders and the flowers of his army and all the skilled craftsmen in his capital, including some of the priests, even like the young Ezekiel, who went into captivity at that time. Now the third and final captivity took place after the storming of Jerusalem in 567 BC, and that's when the people of Judah that had not escaped to the hills and joined with the guerrillas, and that's when they were taken captivity and taken into Babylon. So there was three major invasions of Jerusalem. So this is all helping us to date what was going on here. Okay, and verse 2. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hands, with some of the articles of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar, into the house of his God, and he brought the articles into the treasure house of his God. Now, this is saying that Nebuchadnezzar, when he invaded Jerusalem, and when he overtook them and took the main people into captivity, and it's really actually saying that God put them led them into Nebuchadnezzar's hand, because they were not abiding by God's laws and by the covenant, and they were just doing things the way they wanted to do rather than the way God wanted them to do, pretty much like what's happening in our world today. And so God gave them into the hands of Jehoiakim, or into the hands of Nebuchadnezzar. But they also at that time took some of the vessels from the temple, some of the cups that were used for worship, some of the bowls, the stands and stuff, all those vessels that were sacred, that were to be used only in the temple to worship God. Those were the things that Nebuchadnezzar took, and he took them and put them into his God's house, his God being the pagan gods that he worshipped, into the temple that they had in Babylon with all of their stuff. Now, we're going to hear about these vessels later on in the book, but just here's where they were taken, where they were confiscated more or less by the army by Nebuchadnezzar, and then take them off and put into his God's house, or the treasure of his God, according to what the scripture here says. Now, Daniel 1:3 says, Then the king instructed Aspenaz, the master of his eunuchs. This Aspenaz was the one that was in charge of all the eunuchs. He instructed him to bring some of the children of Israel and some of the king's descendants and some of his nobles. In other words, just like we were saying before, he was smart. Instead of just obliterating all the people and moving on, or taking people captive and using them as slaves, he took the smartest, he took the flowers, he took the best of the crop, he took the ones who had already, the young men that were in their teens or maybe early 20s, and he used those guys, those who were well educated, who had already had what we would call a college degree. They knew science, they knew mathematics, they knew languages. He took those people to use in his kingdom and not use as slaves. And he turned them over to the master of his eunuchs, Aspenaz. Okay, verse 4. Young men whom there was no blemish, he's talking about the ones that he brought into captivity, young men in whom there was no blemish, but good-looking, gifted in all wisdom, possessing knowledge and quick to understand, who had the ability to serve in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the language and literature of the Chaldeans. Now, Chaldeans, you'll see that used all through here. Chaldeans were astronomers. They were ones who told the future by the stars. But they were pretty much in control of things that were going on in Babylon at that time. Okay, now, Nebuchadnezzar adopted an enlightened policy of enlisting the most promising young men, as I said, for his new empire into the government service. It didn't matter what their nationality was. He brought them in, trained them, and used them in his service. And rather than reserving leadership for the Chaldeans alone, or even for the ethnic Babylonians whose culture and traditions reached back to the age of Hammurabi, instead of using those, Nebuchadnezzar resolved to pool the best brains and abilities discovered in the ranks of all the nations that he captured. Smart man. Since the hostages from Judah included the finest of the royalty and the nobility and the best of all that they had, he opened up the special opportunities for these gifted young men and young Jews to attend the Royal Academy in Babylon, which was very well noted for its education. The court officials named Aspenaz. They put him in charge. Took Aspenaz and put him in charge of these students that had qualified. Verse 7. To them the chief of the eunuchs gave names. He gave the name of Daniel to Belteshazzar. Now Belteshazzar, remember, Daniel is Belteshazzar, not Belshazzar. Remember last week we talked about the T and the cross and his name to help us to remember what's the difference. So Daniel named Belteshazzar. He gave Hananiah the name of Shadrach, to Mishael, Meshach, and to Azariah, Abednego. So that's where we get Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We hear the kids, they're using their Babylonian names in most of the songs and stories and things that we learned in Sunday school or kids' church. Okay. Verse 8. But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with a portion of the king's delicacies. Now, see, they put them into the special class, you might say. Postgraduate school, I guess, is what it would be like, looking for that advanced degree, working on that. And so he put them in that, but not only did they just send him there for training, there's more to it. Let's read on. Daniel purposed his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's delicacies, nor with the wine which he drank, nor therefore he requested of the chiefs of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. When what he's talking about here is that the delicacies that they were to feed them would be the food from the king's table. That's what the king himself ate, his food and his wine. And those delicacies, that meat on the table, before they were able to eat it, had to be anointed or I don't know what the word I'm looking for is. They used it in worshiping their heathen gods. So it can be used as like a sacrifice to them, and then they eat it. But it was sacrificed or used to honor the heathen gods first. So Daniel did not want to take that meat and that off of that table for him and his buddies, and use that, and by eating that, defile himself or going against the word of God. He was true to his God, and no matter what happened, Daniel was going to be true to God and God first. That was in his life. It was just like, it's very similar to Joel. Very similar to the I'm sorry, my mind just slipped a cog there, and I couldn't remember who it was I was thinking about. But at any rate, he was very true to his God, very true to his God. Just like Joseph, that's who I'm trying to think about. Why couldn't I think of that name? He was like Joseph. You remember how Joseph stayed true to God no matter what happened, and how God blessed him? Well, the same thing is happening here to Daniel. He no matter what happens. See, when he sought to avoid being defiled, that he might not defile himself with the meats from the table, he didn't want to make contact with unclean meat or even clean meat that had become contaminated by the heathen worship. So rather than break faith with his God, rather than go against God, Daniel was willing to risk being kicked out of the school, or might have been made slaves or killed. One thing about it that was sure was that he had his priorities in order, and they were firm. He was going to serve his God and no other God. So he was taking a big chance there, but God was granting him favor. Now, he didn't know it, didn't realize it at the time, but God would. Verse 9, now God had brought Daniel into favor and goodwill of the chief of the eunuchs. Remember again, Joseph, how Joseph was brought into favor with the jailer. Here he is. Same thing is happening here with Daniel. Same God, right? Same God that brings you in favor with your boss and with other people. Okay, verse 10. And the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who has appointed your food and drink. For why should he see your faces looking worse than the young men who are your age? Then you would endanger my head before the king. So he's saying, if I give you just the vegetables and water, and then you waste away and you're malnourished and everything, and the king sees that, he's going to off my head. He left me in charge of you. So Daniel said to the steward, whom the chief of eunuchs had set over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please test your servants for 10 days, and let them give us vegetables to eat and water to drink. So let's take it to you here. You give us 10 days on vegetables and water, and see if we don't fare better than the others. He says, then let our appearance be examined. So see how we look before you, and the appearance of the young men who eat a portion of the king's delicacies, and you'll see, as you see fit, so deal with your servants. So compare us after 10 days. If we don't improve, if we're not better than the others, then do what you want to with us. Okay? Verse 14. So he consented with them in this matter and tested them for 10 days. So he did that for 10 days. And at the end of 10 days, their features appeared better and fatter and in flesh than all the young men who ate the portion of the king's delicacies. So you see, God brought another miracle in their life. He made them fatter and better looking than the guys that ate the king's stuff. I started to say slop, but probably wasn't really slop. It's probably really good stuff. Only it was defiled. Okay, verse 16. Thus the steward took away the portion of delicacies and the wine as they were to drink, and gave them vegetables. So he took away the delicacies and the wine and gave them vegetables and water, because they had proven that they could live on that and flourish on it. Verse 17. As for these 4 young men, God gave them knowledge and skill and literature and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all the visions and dreams. So not only did he make them flourish physically with the food that they ate, but he also, God, gave them wisdom in knowledge and skill in all the literature and all the things about it, and also gave Daniel understanding of visions and dreams. So God is working. Verse 18. Now at the end of the days, when the king had said when the king had said that they should be brought in, the chief of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. See, now the chief of the eunuchs was checking them out as far as their physical development was, but now they're going into the king for their oral exams. They're going to stand before the king now, and the king will ask the questions and see what he can find out. See, verse 19, and the king interviewed them. He talked to them and asked them questions, and among them all, none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore they served before the king. He asked them questions, and he saw their appearance, and none of them were greater than these guys. In fact, verse 20, and in all matters of wisdom and understanding, about which the king examined them, and he talked to them about all the stuff they were learning, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers who were in all this realm. Now, that's great for them, but don't get them mixed up with these magicians and astrologers. That doesn't mean that they had become magicians or astrologers or anything like that. They were still God-fearing Jews. They are not given into that. That just means that they were as wise as those other people were. Okay, verse 21. Thus Daniel continued until the first year of King Cyrus. Now that's an important verse, because this verse gives us significant fact about the length of Daniel's career in public service. He continued until the first year of King Cyrus. Well, Daniel's retirement, and he did retire. He lived to be about 90 years old, and he retired and lived a pretty good life after his retirement, from what we can determine. But his retirement must have taken place somewhere in the many years before he died. So he lived quite a while after he retired. But the reason for that is because he spoke of receiving revelations into the 3rd year of Cyrus. So in chapter 10, verse 1, we can read more about that. But what this is 2 years after his retirement. He's still giving interpretations of visions. So he's still available, still there. Now, if you remember also, last time I talked about this book being written in 2 languages. It was written in Hebrew and Aramaic. First chapter is Hebrew, the 2nd chapter through 7th chapter is in Aramaic, and then the final chapters after that is in Hebrew. That's because he had 2 different audiences. He had the Jews the hard Jews who read in Aramaic, and he wanted to reach them, but he also had the others who worked in Hebrew. So it made sense that he would write it in 2 languages. But you also got to realize this book is not in chronological order. It's not like reading a novel, and from one chapter 1 and chapter 2 goes on down through there. No, it skips around, and you'll see that as we go on. And I'll point out to you in places where it does that. But it does skip, and so the various languages makes a lot more difference that way, a lot more sense than that. Okay, so we're going into chapter 2, which we start out would be in Aramaic. I'm not going to read it in Aramaic. I don't think I could if I had to. But I can read it in English. Right. Daniel 2, verse 1. Now the second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, and his spirit was so troubled that his sleep left him. So here now Nebuchadnezzar is having his dream, his first one that's recorded. He's having this dream, and it was such an important dream, or it hit him so hard that he couldn't sleep after that. He needed to know what it meant. And so it was a remarkable dream. It was a remarkable dream, as we find out, because it disclosed that it's disclosing God's plan for the ages, what God's plan for the world from that time until His coming kingdom, God's coming kingdom, was described and was part of all this dream that he had. It was granted this dream was granted to Nebuchadnezzar in the second year of his reign, and he got it. That would have been between April of 603 and March of 602, around that time. He was convinced that it contained a message of utmost importance, and it wasn't like most dreams. It wasn't just a passing fancy. I mean, this was an important dream, as we all know, and it came from God Himself. Okay. Verse 2. Then the king gave the command to call the magicians, the astrologers, and the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans to tell the king his dreams. Now that was the way he did things. He had these future readers, fortune tellers, palm readers, whatever you want to call them, at his beck and call, and they were always there to please him and to say the right things for him. And so now he had this dream, and he brought them to stand before him. And in verse 3 says, the king said to them, I have had a dream, and my spirit is anxious to know the dream. Then the Chaldeans spoke to the king in Aramaic, spoke in his language. So, O king, live forever. Now that doesn't mean they expected him to live forever, but that's kind of like saying, long live the king or long live the queen, okay? O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will give you the interpretation. Now, isn't that something? I could do that. You tell me your dream, and I'll give you an interpretation for it. Probably won't be accurate, probably might not even make sense to you, but I can sure make up something for you, and that's what these guys were doing. They're a bunch of phonies. We know that. And the king was getting onto that, and he answered him and said to the Chaldeans, my decision is firm. If you do not make known the dream to me and its interpretation, you shall be cut to pieces, and your houses shall be made an ash heap. See, he was serious about that. Now, here where it says cut to pieces, it doesn't mean taking a sword or axe and chopping it to pieces. They had a way of punishing people in that day that was much more cruel than that. They'd take two trees and they'd pull them together and they'd tie them together at the top. And then they would tie the person who was being punished's hands to the top, his arms to the top of the tree, his legs to the bottom of the tree. Then they'd cut the rope separating in trees, and then you zap your 4 separate pieces. Cut to pieces. And then they'd destroy your house, tear it down and burn it up. There'd be nothing left but an ash heap. That's not unusual either, because today they still do the same thing in Israel. The Israelis, if they find a terrorist, they will not only punish the terrorist, but they'll punish his family, because they figure the family had to know about it. He was living with them. And then they'll bulldoze their house, completely tear it away like it never existed. Yeah. Okay, verse 6. However, he's giving one out now. However, if you tell me the dream and its interpretation, you shall receive for me gifts, rewards, and great honor. Therefore, tell me the dream and its interpretation, and I'll take care of you. You can do that. Verse 7. They answered again and said, "Let the king tell his servants to dream, and we'll give you the interpretation." Well, they're not giving up, but neither is the king. Verse 8. The king answered and said, "I know for certain that you would gain time, because you see that my decision is firm." You're fiddling around, you're messing it up. You're trying to get time when you're trying to gain time to make a better move. "If you do not make known the dream for me, there is only one decree for you have agreed to speak lying and corrupt words before me till the time has changed. Therefore, tell me the dream, and I shall know that you can give me its interpretation." So quit messing around. I want to know the answer. If you can't give me the answer, you're going to be punished for it. If you can give me the answer, I'll reward you. Verse 10. The Chaldeans answered the king and said, "There is not a man on earth who can tell the king's matter. Therefore no king, lord, or ruler has ever asked such thing from any magician, astrologer, or Chaldean. It is a difficult thing that the king requests, and there is no other who can tell the king except the gods whose dwelling is not with flesh." Now you see, they were making a statement there, but they didn't realize what they were saying. They're telling the truth. The only one who has an answer to that is the God who doesn't dwell in the flesh, the God of gods, the God of heaven. He had the answer, but they didn't realize that. Verse 12. For this reason the king was angry. He was very furious, and he gave the command to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. Get rid of them. So the decree went out, and they began killing the wise men, and they sought Daniel and his companions to kill them. So I guess he wanted to come after Daniel and his buddies first. Maybe that was God's doing too. Verse 14. Then with counsel and wisdom Daniel answered Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, who had gone out to kill the wise men of Babylon. He answered and said to Arioch, the king's captain, "Why is the decree from the king so urgent?" Then Arioch made the decision known to Daniel. He told Daniel what was going on. Verse 16. So Daniel went in and asked the king to give him time, that he might tell the king the interpretation. So the king was getting on the other guys about wanting to fiddle around, and now Daniel asks for time, and the king gives it to him. Daniel has got favor. Verse 17. Then Daniel went on, had a reason for that. He had a reason for asking for time, because he wanted to go and consult with God. Then Daniel went to his house, and he made the decision known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah and his companions. You know what they did? They had themselves a big Holy Ghost prayer meeting. They went to a knee-bending, face on the floor prayer meeting and started praying to God. Verse 18 tells us that they might seek mercies from the God of heaven concerning this secret, so Daniel and his companions might not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Now the stage was set. The chance was now that God to show his power and his wisdom, show that he was the true God, over against the inarticulate and impotent imaginary gods that the magicians worshipped. In the same general theme that dominates the remainder of the whole book of Daniel, and serves to remind the Hebrew nation that despite their own failure, collapse, and banishment into exile, the God of Israel remains as omnipotent as ever in the days of Moses. And his conventional love remains as steadfast towards the seed of Abraham as it has ever been. Okay. Then the secret was revealed to Daniel. He went in prayer and asked God to give him the secret. It says, verse 19, the secret was revealed to Daniel in the night vision. So he got it while he was asleep. Daniel blessed the God of heaven. So he didn't just get up and say, yippee, I got it, and go give it to the king. He has something to do first, something that we all need to do. When God gives us blessing and God gives us answered prayer, we need to stop, take time right then, and bless God for the answer. Daniel answered and said, Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his. And he changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and raises up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and the knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and secret things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells in him. I thank you and praise you, O God of my fathers. You have given me wisdom and might, and have now made known to me what we ask of you. For you have made known to us the king's demands. Okay. Verse 24. Therefore Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and said thus to him, Do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. Take me before the king, and I'll tell the king his interpretation. Then Arioch quickly brought Daniel before the king and said thus to him. Now listen to what he says. I have found a man of the captives of Judah. Did he have to look hard to find him? The man who was a captive of Judah, Daniel, came to him and told him he had this. Is he giving Daniel any credit for it? No, he's taking the credit for it himself. I have found a man. See a lot of people like that, don't we? Verse 26. The king answered and said to Daniel, whose name was Belshazzar. The king knows where this is coming from. Are you able to make known to me the dream which I have seen and its interpretation? Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, The secret which the king has demanded the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, the soothsayers cannot declare to the king. None of your phonies can tell you what it is. The only person who can tell you is verse 20 through 28. There is a God in heaven who reveals secrets, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. He's told you, king, what's going to happen from now until the end of the time. Your dream and your vision and your head upon, with the dream and the visions of your head upon a bed were these. Verse 29. As for you, O king, thoughts came to your mind while you were in bed about what would come to pass after this. And he who reveals secrets has made known to you what will be. But as far as me, this secret has not been revealed to me, because I have more wisdom than anyone living. But for our sakes, who make known the interpretation of the king, and that you may know the thoughts of your heart. You, O king, were watching, and behold, here's going to tell him about his dream. Behold, this great image, whose splendor was excellent, stood before you, and its form was awesome. Your handout. This is the statue. This is the vision, or what they think his vision was like. Now, it's written backwards, but this is pretty much what they were talking about. In this image, the head was of gold. The top head was gold. Look at your handout. The head was of gold. Fine gold. The chest and the arms of silver. Silver. Its belly and thighs of bronze. Gold, silver, bronze. Okay. And then the legs were of iron, and his feet partly of iron and partly of clay. Now you watched while a stone was cut. This is important here. You watched while a stone was cut out without hands. It was taken, a stone, and no hands. So apparently it was God that did it. It struck the image on its feet of iron, that statue on the feet, and clay, and broke them to pieces. Then the iron and clay, the bronze, the silver, the gold were crushed together and became like chaff in the summer threshing floors. The wind carried them away so that no trace of them was found. Now, that stone hit the feet of the statue. Hit the feet of the statue, and it started to crumble. And it crumbled all the way up. Everything here just crumbled and fell and formed just a powdery dust. And the wind came along and blew it all away, and there was nothing left except the stone. The stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. Now, this is the dream. Now we will tell the interpretation of it before the king. So he gave him the dream, now he's going to tell him the interpretation. So the king should be happy because he was able to tell him the dream. Verse 37, You, O king, are a king of kings, for the God of heaven has given you the kingdom, power, strength, and glory. And wherever the children of men dwell, are the beasts of the field and the birds of the heaven, he has given them to your hand and has made you ruler over them all. You are this head of gold. Now he says, you're the head of gold, but you're not there because of you. It's not because of anything you did. It's because God of heaven gave all that to you. Right? Okay, so let's look at the rest of it. Verse 39. But after you shall arise another kingdom inferior to yours. Okay, that's the silver. That's the silver. Now, he said it's inferior to yours. Then another, first of all, let me go back. But after you shall arise another kingdom inferior to yours, then another, a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. So this kingdom, first kingdom, he didn't talk about it very much. He just kind of hit it and missed. That's because it was a short time, a short kingdom. And silver stood for the Medo-Persian. That began with Cyrus the Great, and when he conquered Babylon in 539, but then he died 10 years later. So his kingdom was just short-lived. So it was, even though it was silver and it was strong, it didn't last long. And so it wasn't. He didn't mention that too much. But he says, then a third kingdom of bronze, okay, which shall rule over the whole earth. Okay, so the bronze is a little stronger. Notice that going from the top to the bottom here, we go from soft metal down to the hardest iron, gold to iron. And also it goes from the most expensive down to the least expensive, the clay. Keep that in mind. Because bronze was the empire of the Greco-Macedonian. It was established by Alexander the Great. You've all heard of him, I'm sure. And he began his invasion of Persia in 334, and he crushed the last resistance in 331. So it was only a 3-year battle, so that was not bad in those times. He established a realm extending from the border of Yugoslavia to beyond India. It was the largest empire. The largest empire in all of ancient times was Alexander the Great. That was where our Greeks were coming in. And that was the bronze that ruled over all the earth. Verse 40, and the fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron. That's the strongest metal, remember. Inasmuch as iron breaks in pieces and shatters everything. And like iron that crushes that kingdom will break in pieces and crush all the others. Okay? Now, the legs are made of iron, the strongest of the metals. And from a despotic standpoint, that would be the Roman Republic, the Romans. It was of far less value than gold or silver or bronze, but yet the iron was the most suited to crush any opposing powers. Iron denotes toughness and ruthlessness and describes the Roman Empire that reached its widest extent during the reign of Trajan from 98 to 117 A.D. That he occupied Romania and much of Assyria, and at least a few brief years. Verse 41, whereas you saw the feet and the toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, yet the strength of the iron shall be in it, just as you saw the iron mixed with ceramic clay. Okay, now the text implies here that the final phase, or the feet, will be marked by some sort of a federation, 10 federations, rather than one kingdom. The iron is going to be possibly represent the influence of the old Roman culture and its traditions, and the pottery could represent the inherent weakness of a socialist society, based on relativism and morality and philosophy, like our society is today. And out of this mixture of iron and clay comes weakness, confusion, pointing to the approaching day of doom, or the coming of Jesus Christ. Ooh, getting excited, huh? Verse 42, and as the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly fragile. As you saw iron mixed with ceramic clay, they will mingle with the seed of men, and they will not adhere to one another, just as iron does not mix with clay. So you're going to see disunity, class struggle, racism, even some maybe civil war, resulting from a failure of a hopeless, divided society to achieve an integrated world order. They're not going to be able to do that. Now, the iron and the pottery may may coexist. The iron and pottery could coexist, but they can't combine into a strong and durable world order. In these days, the kings the God of heaven will set up. In these days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up. In other words, the days of the kings that God of heaven is setting up. God himself is putting them on the throne, which shall never be destroyed. The kingdom that God is going to set up will never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be let to other people. It shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. Now it's talking about the coming of the Lord Jesus Christ, the coming of God. Inasmuch as you saw that the stone was cut out of the mountain, this will tell you about it, without hands, and that it broke in pieces of the iron and the bronze, the clay, and the silver and the gold, and the great God has made known to the king what will come to pass after this. The dream is certain, and the interpretation is sure. See, not only here, but in Daniel 7, chapter 7, and the parallel passages, they leave us no doubt that this fifth realm is the kingdom of God. It's the second coming of Christ, the kingdom of God, ruled over by Christ and enduring eternally, even after its earthly millennial phase is over. Okay, verse 46. We'll go more into this in depth as we go through the book. Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face, prostrate before Daniel. Commanded that they should present an offering and incense to him. Now this is something that's unheard of. Never has it been heard that the king, a reigning king, should fall on his face before anyone. And here he is falling in his face before this man that he brought in, this Hebrew, this Jew. But he's not falling on his face for him, really. It's his God that he's worshiping, his God that he's setting up incense for. In verse 47, the king answered Daniel, and this will tell you what he was thinking. And he said, truly your God is the God of gods. Truly your God is the God of gods. That's what Daniel been trying to tell him. The Lord of kings and the revealer of secrets. It says he could reveal to you the secret. It worked, didn't it? Brought him to know Jesus, know God. Verse 48, then the king promoted Daniel. Gave him, to sound like Joseph again, the king promoted Daniel and gave him many great gifts and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon and chief administrator over the wise men of Babylon. Also Daniel petitioned the king, and he set Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon. But Daniel sat in the gate at the king. Now this does not mean that Daniel sat down in the gate as they're coming into the town. They had a house or a room that was built by the gate. It was kind of like a town hall or meeting place. It was where the business took place, where decisions were made. And what it meant was not Daniel sat there all the time. It just meant that Daniel was the one who would sit there and keep order and make the decisions for the kingdom. Boy, doesn't our God great. Our God really, really can do things, can't he? And just think of all the things he's done in your life. Take time and just sit and go over that a little bit. But in the meantime, also, read on through the book again. Be ready for next week, because next week is going to be another good one. Next week we get to see the fiery furnace. Hang in there. Have a wonderful week. May God richly bless you, keep you. May his face shine on you, and may he give you peace. Remember, I love you very, very much. Have a great week. Goodbye.